on March 4th, 2021, with one click of the mouse, hundreds of hours wasted, and the unnamed SMP. Several hundred hours were sunk into the unnamed SMP, and now that it's gone, I'm ready to say my final goodbyes.
Can you imagine if you could, time travel, but only back in time to right when the SMP was created, and you, really, if you could time travel just to right in my room when I was creating the SMP, what would you say?
Chicken Charm, you don't know me. Well, actually, you do. You don't recognize my face. You may recognize my voice, though. I don't know. A lot has changed in 2 years. Yup, 2 years. You're gonna hop on the trend of making SMPs. Unlike everyone else, this SMP is gonna be something different. This SMP will hurt a lot of people. It will probably make you regret ever starting it. But all the good things that come out of this SMP, they weigh the scale out in favor 1,000 times over.
So I decided to make my own SMP server. Now, this is my first time on the server, and some other people were on it before me, so I had to catch up.
Our story begins in a time of peace and disruption. The COVID-19 pandemic. As July bled into August with seemingly no end in sight, the world, still under lockdown, was trapped in deadlock. However, this was not the Spanish flu.
We have technology!
And while the world was brewing an unfortunate concoction of pain and disease, the internet had other ideas in store. Even towards the beginning of 2020, the concept of an SMP was widely accepted. SMP stands for Survival Multiplayer, and it is a game mode in the game Minecraft. Debuting in 2009, Minecraft was and still is one of the most popular games. At its core, Minecraft is a game based on survival. But what if we could survive with friends, enjoy the time, and make laughs along the way? It seems unlikely, but dating back all the way to the start of 2012, people were playing survival worlds with their friends on SMPs such as Hermitcraft. However, these SMPs lacked one thing, something that would make only the brightest and biggest stand out. The Dream SMP was an SMP similar to all others. It seemed like a start to one that would be popular for a moment, but then die out. But then...
You want to be a hero, Tommy? Then die like one! I choose blood! No, I have the blade.
Did he just have a heart attack?
The Dream SMP became one of the most popular topics in the entire world, and it shocked the Minecraft community to the core. But how? Well, the Dream SMP took ideas of roleplay and lore. While previous Minecraft servers were largely based on mega builds and long hours of grinding away at the game, the Dream SMP was largely based on lore. And seemingly out of nowhere, all of these lore ideas began surfacing. Even Hermitcraft, the server notorious for large builds and players who have way too much time on their hands, began shifting more towards lore and roleplay. But before that, one server would rise. It was not the most popular server in the world. In fact, by today's standards, it would be considered unpopular. And the strange story of one of Minecraft's most interesting SMPs proves that numbers don't mean anything. With friendship, rivalry, chaos, and destruction, There's a lot to cover, but I'll be covering all of it in the Unnamed SMP's full history. Roblox and Dog of Wisdom YouTuber Chicken Charm creates an SMP on August 26, 2020, which was yet to have an official name. Instead, Chicken opts to call it Unnamed SMP, and its name summarizes everything about it. To prevent it from being too bland, Chicken prohibits the entry of the end and also installs a few mods. Within the first week, the server was already doing alright for Chicken standards. However, the server would die out due to inactivity. But something would happen that would cause the server's revival and pave the way for the Unnamed SMP to commence. Let's just say you've heard this story before. Chicken's friend Markle is invited onto the server. Markle asks if he can invite two of his other friends who are granted permission to join by Chicken. What Chicken doesn't know is that these two friends would end up griefing the entire server. Ninja and Weebichu, possibly Chicken's closest friends at the time, lived with Chicken in an area called the Outback. A few other members lived there too, such as Wrath, but that would all mean nothing as the griefers came and killed pets and destroyed houses. However, this curse was actually a blessing in disguise. Chicken banned both players, and to make sure Markle wasn't in on it, he banned him as well. Chicken then gave everyone diamond blocks for their troubles. Now, the server actually had people playing on it, and it would be a long time before that changed. Chicken now had an average of 3 players on it essentially daily, and it was not slowing down. But Chicken had no intention of keeping it at only 3 players. For the entirety of October, the members of the Outback were happy. Without much to do, the server was thought to be a nice and chill server without conflict. How wrong we were. Chicken believes that the only way to keep the server going was by stealing another server's idea.
Capitalism.
Chicken had watched the Dream SMP and was inspired by Wilbur's character arc. Not wanting to abandon the Outback, he decided to host an election to see who should become the president of it. Chicken immediately ran as the first candidate, and because anyone else could run, it wasn't long before a new challenger approached. I did previously mention Ninja Cheetah, but now let's go more into depth into their character. Ninja was friends with Chicken since his early Roblox days, which is really saying something. Now, it's unclear whether Chicken encouraged Ninja to run for the election or they just ran because, but one thing's for sure, Chicken had competition. Chicken needed a vice to help him run the operation. He settled for his other friend Weebichu, and together, they began construction on the White House, a small building at the top of the hill in the center of the Outback. Meanwhile, Ninja hires Dropmaster to be their vice, and things are going well and the election is underway. But there was one other candidate, capable of destroying the odds, someone who could win 1,000 times over. And this time, I'm not kidding. It's Cello Slays. I was on the server essentially since the beginning. However, I never settled in the Outback because I had no idea where it was. Instead, I settled in a plains biome next to 2 naturally spawning pink sheep. One died while going down a mountain, but the other lived, and I dubbed the Whole Sheep and the land that I stood on the Holy Land. One day, Weebichu approached my house and dyed Whole Sheep blue. I then dyed him back to pink, but then the next day, Whole Sheep was murdered. To this day, no one has confessed to murdering Whole Sheep almost 2 years later. As an act of spite and to try to make the election more interesting, I ran for president. The election was democracy, there is no arguing that. But how could the unnamed SMP have democracy without people? This was the question on Ninja Cheetah's mind. Fearing that the election was going Chicken's way and the unnamed SMP's unpopularity potentially being its downfall, on November 11th, 2020, Ninja invited a bunch of people to the SMP. This would change the tide of the election. It was actually going to be close. Despite not being invited by Ninja, one player would join the SMP around the time of the population change. This player would be arguably one of the most influential throughout the history of the server. If you've seen even one unnamed SMP video, chances are you know who this is. Mayday was on the server since the beginning as well, however his time was more log on for 10 minutes and then leave. But Ninja's population change caused him to return. Because I was pretty good friends with him, I decided to make him my vice, and together we made a mending book company. However, Ninja discovered the village that we used and had Chicken build a Grand Quartz road to it. The mending book dream was dead, but we still had some other valuables that we could sell, and so I created Cello Tray, missing a D because I didn't fit it on the building. However, another member named Epic Zoomer, also known as Evan, decided that he wanted in on the company as well. Since I was good IRL friends with him, I let him in only to discover that he renamed my horse, Whole Horse, to He Hours. A bit of a theme throughout the SMP is that I tend to get pissed off when people disrespect the tiny things in my life, and this act of renaming Whole Horse with incorrect grammar tipped me over the edge. I started attacking Evan repeatedly, and Chicken had to make a new rule that spawn attacking someone was not allowed. After that, Cello Tray lost its reputation and everyone relocated. After we all had some time to cool off, we decided that a stupid horse was not worth fighting for. Mayday went with Evan while I went far away. I was still in the election though, and so was Mayday. The only problem was, where did they go? Who did they go to? Who on the server was more powerful than me, yet not any of the other candidates? Well, this answer was simple. Too simple. And too easy. Because there was a player, so incredibly stacked, so incredibly rich, and so incredibly sleep deprived, to be able to play up to 12 hours on the unnamed SMP, a server with barely 30 people. You know his name, you know who he is. It's Koljal. Koljal began playing on the unnamed SMP when he was invited by Ninja. Koljal was ridiculously wealthy because he was essentially the biggest no-life of all time. He played on the SMP day and night and quickly became the richest player. With nowhere else to go, Mayday and Evan escaped to his house and stayed there for a while. Later in the day, Ninja DM'd me with an interesting request. Ninja wanted to pool votes with me. In the Dream SMP, this was a key moment as it began the rise of Manberg, the death of Wilbur, and essentially the beginning of lore on the Dream SMP. For the unnamed SMP, however, it wouldn't be as important, but definitely not as straightforward. For now though, Ninja and I agreed to keep it to ourselves, and I'll explain why this is important later. With the election underway, however, the presidential speeches were announced. On November 13th, 2020, Ninja, Weebichu, Chicken, Drop, Mayday, and I gathered at the White House to make speeches to the public despite only the presidential candidates being there and their respective vices. The demographic was interesting, to say the least. Chicken, being the technical discoverer of the land as well as the only reason they were there in the first place, should have been president. Thus, most of his claims were defensive claims, such as why the public should vote for him. Meanwhile, Ninja mostly spoke offensive claims, such as why the public shouldn't vote for Chicken. As far as they knew, they were losing. On the opposite end of the spectrum, probably literally, I made a somewhat rushed monologue of why taxes are bad and proceeded to dance and throw poop on the stage. Despite the lack of people attending except for Koljal and Knight, who dropped in briefly, the election was going to be very close. especially after what would happen next. Do you remember when I said that Koljalt was invited by Ninja? Well, Ninja would go on to take 5 netherite ingots from Koljalt, which would severely piss him off. Koljalt would later vow to destroy Ninja's horse, Tater. Ninja originally hid Tater inside of a mountain, but after a brief moment, Ninja brought Tater out only for the poor horse to be slaughtered by Koljalt right then and there. Because she was Ninja's vice, Drop decided to fire back at Koljalt. Drop asked Mayday where Koljalt's house was, and Mayday led him to Evan's house instead of Koljalt's. When Evan came online to find that his house was destroyed, he joined the war on Koljalt's side. Drop's llamas were murdered, Ninja's shop was griefed, and overall, there was no clear winner. This conflict ruined Ninja's reputation on the server from Koljalt, Evan, and Mayday's point of view. Despite the fact that they probably weren't voting for them in the first place, they definitely wouldn't be after this war. On November 21st, 2020, the first ever election for the Outback would be held. In the end, Chicken won with 7 votes, followed by Ninja with 5 and me with 3. However, Ninja brought up the pool, and this is where things get interesting. Yes, we did agree to pool votes, but we never made it official and we never told anybody. If Ninja and I did pool votes, we would be won over Chicken. Thus, we took it to the court. At the end of the day, I admitted to the pool never being truly stated and that it wasn't fair, and that Chicken was the real winner. Chicken came out victorious and he officially renamed the Outback to the Great City of Akashi, GCA for short, after the greatest anime character of all time, and the server was quiet once more. Before the Tater War, 2 members were on the SMP. These 2 members, Nico PvP and Crimson. During their time on the SMP, they were constantly causing chaos and bending the rules. Eventually, they established the unnamed SMP Mafia. These 2 members are not the same as the original griefers, but it is worthy to mention that Marco was unbanned because he did not know his friends were going to grief. Despite this, his pets were killed by Nico and Crimson. Evan and Mayday had had enough and planned to end their reign. After sneaking into their base with potions, they ransacked everything that they could get and proved that Nico and Crimson were bending the rules. Chicken would ban both of them. After that, Evan and Mayday joined Koljalt in ripping off yet another plotline from the Dream SMP, this time breaking free from the GCA and making their own country called the Sugarcane Isle, where they would sell sugar. The Sugarcane Isles was located across the desert where the PP ruins were. The Sugarcane Isles were very powerful and were almost even more so than the GCA. Despite their ability to no-life the unnamed SMP, Evan, Mayday, and especially Koljalt were constantly being stolen from. It got to the point where the Sugarcane Isle collapsed and its members relocated to a new area called the Kingdom of the Shronks. The Kingdom of the Shronks was located much further away than the Sugarcane Isles. While Koljalt got money from grinding, Evan and Mayday had other ideas. I was in my floating island nation at least 10,000 blocks away from everyone else, but I had some time to spare. Together, Evan, Mayday, and I created the disc shop in the GCA. We would sell discs that we would get the previous night by having skeletons shoot creepers. It made lots of money, and it was only bested by Mayday's netherite shop. However, good things don't last forever, and we were forced to shut down because we could not afford the additional taxes due to us because the shop blocked the view of the White House. Chicken was growing increasingly more and more frustrated with Weebichu. Something that I did not mention before but is worthy to mention now is that Weebichu did not show up for the election. Furthermore, Weebichu had not really played on the server much past the election. Thus, Chicken fired Weebichu and went on the hunt for a new vice for the rest of his term, which by now was indefinite. Chicken failed to find a proper vice, but did find a friend. Do you remember earlier when I was talking about the Mafia? Well, Nico's time banned was just about up, and to make sure he doesn't try anything to start the Mafia again, Chicken asks a favor of Nico. Chicken and Nico arrive at the Kingdom of the Shronks. After marveling at Koljalt's work, Chicken fears that Koljalt may declare war on the GCA. Koljalt could definitely win if he did. But Chicken realizes that he could just destroy all of Koljot's war supplies, and there would be no threat. On December 5th, 2020, Chicken would do just that. Wrong move. The next day, Koljot blew up the GCA. With that, the SMP would descend into a dire state of nothing happening. With both nations now at their weakest, the SMP seemed to be at its breaking point. Chicken resigned from office and fled to my floating island nation, and the GCA was left destroyed. However, the members began to get their act straight, and sooner or later, the GCA was back. What was once a simple village now contained giant structures of skyscrapers, buildings, and more. The entire server was once again up and running. But the tension didn't stop. The 3 members of the Kingdom of the Strongs once again relocated to a new country called Squawburg. My island nation was blown up by yet another unknown player, and I would relocate to my own country called Sachsenberg. Tensions were high, and they could break at any second. There was only one thing that we could do: stall at all costs. The first thing we did to stall the outbreak of war was to distract people with memes. A new building sprouted up in the GCA called the Meme Room. Players would use a plugin to turn maps into memes and hang them in item frames. This worked surprisingly well. Next, the members wanted to make another election, as if the previous one hadn't taught them anything. Ninja would run for president with Chicken as their vice. Marco would also run with Nico as his vice. The server was not in such a state of tension over the impending war, but rather the GCA politics. Right before the election started, however, Nico would be swapped with Evan, as Nico did not show up. If Evan became the vice president of the nation that was his nation's enemy, diplomatic relations could break and start the war. At the end of the day, however, there was no concern, as Ninja and Chicken won the election. The third thing to happen seemed like a surefire way to prevent the war. If there was no server to have a war on, there would be no war. On January 14th, 2021, Chicken would officially delete the unnamed SMP due to the stress it caused on him. He claimed that the people believed the server was dead, even though it was going to be the most alive it had ever been. A couple of days after, though, Chicken would bring it back due to the demand and because he claimed that he had no life anyways. Following these events, the war was slowly pushed to the back of people's minds. A few new nations started popping up, such as Ensgate, run by Creative Melody, Sabeling, run by SkyPC and Divine, and Sachsenberg hosted the Blue Fire tournament. Everything seemed to be going well, until the first spark appeared. First signs of the server going in the wrong direction was Marco's destruction of the Meme Room on January 22nd, 2021. Afterward, he blamed himself and stopped playing, but this action would spark the downfall of the unnamed SMP. Shortly after, on February 1st, ignition occurred. Ninja is denied access into Squawburg and begins using their operator powers to mess with the members. Things aren't looking good. Mayday is secretly hoping that Ninja blows up Squawburg because it would give Chicken a reason to ban Ninja. Eventually, Mayday got his wish. The fire had been lit. After Squawburg was blown up, Ninja teleported everyone to the GCA where they started killing everyone. Chicken saw this and remotely shut off the server. Afterwards, Mayday, Evan, Ninja, and I played Bed Wars. We thought the flame had died down, but it was time for it to spread. On February 6th, the server opened back up again, and despite being pretty upset, Evan refrained from anything too crazy. However, there would be 2 final reasons that would tip him over the edge to chaos. The first was that Evan was pissed at Ninja for using op commands to blow up Squawburg, and Redacted, who was a Squawburg member, decided it wasn't worth salvaging and blew up the rest of it. The second was that Evan and Koljot had a bit of a canonical bromance, but so did Koljot and Chicken. Evan finds out about Killjoy Chicken's bromance and confronts them about it, but gets muted in the Discord server for causing chaos. Finally, angered to his boiling point, Evan shows them real chaos. Arson is upon us. After the roar of flames, the SMP would be reduced to nothing more than dust. The GCA was gone, Squawburg was gone, and Chicken would pass ownership to Board, another member at the time. Things were looking dim, and on March 4th, 2021, Board deleted the unnamed SMP for good. No do-overs, no coming back. It was over.
So I decided to make my own SMP server. And this is my first time on the server.
I'd say I'd win. What do you think? Because I'm doing the server. I could earn drink up with you.
War. No one likes it. Well, some people do. But it's not very fun, is it?
Akashi gets elected president, which I do. I get elected. Akashi wins the election. That's it. Dude, Simon's really easy to be honest with you. But I'm gonna show something. They have, and I'm allies with these people. This is literally like, Nico, do you want? What if we just took his war supplies? Is Logan with 1 vote, Melanie/J with 2 votes, Marco with 8 votes, and Kara 2020 with 13 votes, which makes Ninja's the new president.
President!
A bunch of other YouTubers brought me closer to those people. The server was fun. I'm really gonna miss it. Really am. I wanted to thank Chicken and everyone. Yes.
So I decided to make my own SMP server. And this is my first time on the server, and some other people were on it before me, so I had to catch up.
Following the permanent deletion of the Season 1 world, the members went in their own directions. Well, that is, in an alternate reality. Unfortunately, in this reality, the members decided to stay close. They had small communities and random Discord servers everywhere, the first of which was not after Season 1 ended, but it was still on its decline. Mayday and I were in a home and careers class and were taught how to make oven-popped Rice Krispie treats. Thus, the Rice Krispie treats are bad organization of like-minded individuals was born. It quickly fell apart as it had no substantial meaning. Following this, the Season 1 world was actually deleted, but rising from its ashes came the unnamed community Discord server, created by member Divine. After 3 months, everyone stayed there. They never left, they never changed. Things were normal. Now, just because the unnamed SMP never returned, doesn't mean that there weren't attempts to replicate it. Koljal created his own SMP called Koljal SMP on February 13th and believed that it would be the next big one. His idea revolved around resetting the server every now and again. The main problem with the unnamed SMP was that Chicken grew too attached to the world. He refused to reset the world, and thus the server grew dull and boring. Koljal believed that by resetting the world every month or so, the players would have fun. At first, Mayday Evan and I played on it, but slowly forgot about it because it didn't have the same feel as the unnamed SMP. Another SMP was Noah SMP. I haven't mentioned Noah yet, and it's because he was not a member. Noah was not a member on the unnamed SMP in Season 1, but he was still good friends with everyone on it at the time. He attempted to make another SMP as glorious as the unnamed SMP, but failed for the same reason as Kojal's SMP and other attempts: lack of interest. The members did have fun and stayed together though. After the attempts failed, they began simply having fun. Ninja and Noah created this server specifically for Bed Wars. Over time, its use also ran essentially to every game on Hypixel. The Discord server, Bread Wars, was recently popular among the members and even featured people who weren't members in the first season. Things were fine. Things could stay. Maybe it would have been better if things did stay. But you've heard this story before. It didn't. From March through May, the members still had fun and continued together. But this was the unnamed SMP, and the members began craving the old SMP, a return to the normal. And one such member would take that desire to a whole new level. Evan, among many other players, was one of the players who wanted the SMP to return the most. He had joined almost every attempt to revive the server and even tried his own. Despite this, he realized that the only person who could bring the SMP back was Chicken. Evan began asking Chicken specifically to revive the SMP. All throughout March and April, this was what happened. Furthermore, a lot of former members began to realize that the unnamed SMP not only provided a massive recreational support area, but also provided a massive social support area, and that the majority of online social events they were present in were involving other former members. They began to realize that the unnamed SMP's death was harder than first expected. On April 10th, 2021, I created a trailer for a video explaining the history of the SMP. Every member was very excited and began joking that the unnamed SMP would return, knowing that it wouldn't, right? Well, that very day, Chicken would create a Discord server for the official Season 2 server. This time, things would be different. The date of the full history would be pushed back as I was pretty busy with school. On June 6, 2021, Chicken officially announced to the rest of the members that Season 2 was confirmed. Evan was ecstatic. 2 days later, the Discord server opened. That same day, the second trailer for the full history was released. 2 days later, the full history was released. 6 days later, on June 12, 2021, Reincarnation.
3, 2, 1. Alright, IP's in the IP channel.
This week on the unnamed SMP.
Alright. It says you're already whitelisted.
Oh no.
So,
Is there 10 people already here? 1, 2, 3,
I don't
4,
have,
5, 6. We have only 2 more spots.
Who's killing me?
Hold
What
on.
the fuck?
Hold on.
Stop him. What the fuck? It's the first day of the SMP, please.
Wait, who is it? Who's killing you?
I think it's Kojo. I don't have.
Bro.
I have shaders on, which means I don't have full bright, which means I can't see anything in the dark.
Wait, is it time for me to get Sparky 2.0? Let's see, I've got Shit. one singular bow. Shit, I'm
Kojo, what the fuck?
No!
Welcome to the Unnamed SMP recap. My name is Cello Slays, our writer is Cello Slays, the captions provided are by Cello Slays, and we're here to provide all of the events and mishaps that occurred on the first week of Season 2. Before Season 2 officially released, Mayday, Evan, Kojolt, and I hatched a plan to gain authority over the entire SMP. Destroy the Ender Dragon as fast as we can. In other words, become Dream. On opening day, Chicken and Ninja are surprised to find that Mayday and I have straight up dipped out of there. The world is still the same. Literally everything is the same, except for a few members. Who are those new members? Well, there's Jay. Let's be honest, you know Jay. Jay was one of the most important members to join during Season 2, and they were absolutely revolutionary. Jay single-handedly began the lore on the server, and that is why they will be remembered. In spite of Jay's popularity now, they were kind of just part of the group back when Season 2 first began. In the beginning, Chicken, Ninja, Jay, and Weebichu all made houses in the same area as the previous GCA. Instead of building their house in a field, they opted to instead build their house as almost an apartment complex within the GCA mountain. They called this Jungle Gym. Meanwhile, Kojo and Evan were mining for some diamonds. It seemed as though everything was going well. However, the first ever conflict on the server would happen, just hours in. Weebichu was accused by Kojolt of X-raying. Chicken was skeptical at first and went into spectator mode to observe Weebichu's mining.
We're like barely into the SMP and there's like already fucking fights with like Weebichu.
That's when everyone on the server saw that they had operator powers and immediately began using them. Chicken took away everyone's op,
Because our plans didn't account for us being off?
and Weebichu's X-raying trial was put to rest. On the original server, Keep Inventory was left on because the members were stupid. Kojolt thought that Keep Inventory was enabled because it had worked in the overworld. However, Minehut sorts dimensions in different servers, meaning the Nether and End had different game rules. Kojolt ended up dying, thinking Keep Inventory was on, and losing all of his stuff. Throughout the entire experience, Kojolt, Evan, Mayday, and I were all in one VC, while everyone else was in a different one. Wait a second. Where were Mayday and I? Well...
Oh, are we gonna become a group together?
Are they in the nether already?
Wait, where's the portal?
Prepare for the worst, Mayday. Prepare for the worst. Didn't get a pull from that, didn't get a pull from that. Get in the boat! Right? I have to eat that. Oh, I just died. Okay, you have to be like right next to it. I am. Where am I, moment? Power 4. Sharp 3 sweeping edge, 3 aqua affinity. So that book is jacked. Give me some bit. Magic! Please! Yes! I got it. Killed in the process.
process.
Yes!
Wait, hold up. I died in the process.
I also died!
Alright, oh, don't worry about it. Wait, here, I'll give you a pick. Take that one. Behind you!
You see, the four of us had a plan. Mayday and I would speedrun the game while Coldrell and Evan would get diamonds for obsidian to get an ender chest. We would then meet up at the stronghold and defeat the dragon. However, we got a bit sidetracked. After I got the blaze rods, Mayday still hadn't gotten all 12 ender pearls needed, so everyone's attention was focused on getting ender pearls. Coldrell started attacking Chicken, which was not good. Evan wanted to make peace with Weebichu, and the ender pearl count was barely going up. Once we finally got all 12 ender pearls, we entered the end, defeated the dragon, the egg was stored in Mayday's ender chest. Afterwards, we did a raid and solidified ourselves as the Tyrannical Republic of Angers-Temps, or TRA for short. Remember that name. It's very important. After the race to the end, Chicken makes a board with his enemies, neutrals, and allies. Chicken also finds another chicken to be Waddles. Evan had discovered Chicken's music disc from the original server. Evan trades the disc in return for some gear. Evan then proceeds to get way too close to Chicken. The TRA was a bit skeptical of Evan's behavior. After all, the TRA and Jungle Gym were previously enemies in the form of Squawburg plus Sogstenburg against the GCA. Regardless, a peace treaty was signed which temporarily granted the members of each nation the right to build, visit, and live in each other's land. The river was the border. This treaty, however, limited Evan's ability to be nice to the members of the Jungle Gym. Throughout the beginning of the season, Evan had given gifts and tried to make peace with the Jungle Gym way too many times. The most notable was Evan's gift of the Scythe, a golden hoe given to Chicken. The members agreed, without Evan, to limit Evan's kindness. This made Evan slowly drift away from the TRA and move more towards the newly named New Great City of Akashi, New GCA for short. All of this happened in the first week of the unnamed SMP. Nevertheless, the treaty was signed and placed underneath the area it was signed in. Shortly after, Evan begins using it. In Season 1, I had been using a glitch called Elytra Cancelling to fly as if I were in creative mode. Evan wanted to replicate this glitch and tried for many hours, constantly pillaring up with Netherrack to take off. Masiwaset, a new GCA member, saw Evan doing this and took it for him griefing the land. Masi reported Evan to Chicken, who kindly asked Evan not to do that. Chicken's request made Anonymous the snitch, but Evan quickly discovered it was Masi. A heated conflict followed in which Masi's bakery was griefed and he was temporarily banned from the new GCA. At the climax of the story, the banished Masi approaches Evan and attempts to kill him. Evan places an end crystal to defend himself, but Masi blows up the crystal in Evan's house. Chicken believes it is griefing and bans Masi from the server for a while. But the TRA wasn't in the clear yet. They were doing something arguably worse than griefing. They were duping. Shortly after the Netherrack conflict, the TRA members discovered a duping method that was done with an anvil and shulker. The TRA had a secret dupe stash as well as all of the best gear in the game. This was how they would win. With the duped items, Coldrell began construction on his apartment complex while Evan worked on Fort Evan. Meanwhile, the largest build the entire unnamed SMP had seen up until then had construction begun on it by me. And contrary to the other two builds, I didn't dupe a single piece of blackstone, a single gold block, or a single piece of cobblestone. This was Sogstenburg. Sogstenburg was the name of my nation back in Season 1, and I would bring it back in the form of the capital city of the TRA. Evan wanted the capital to be a grand castle that would strike fear into the enemies. Sogstenburg was just that. The castle's construction began on June 21st, 2021, and would end over 7 months later. For now, it would be brewing in the background, waiting for its moment. The next few months on the unnamed SMP can be compared to a chess match. Each side has to develop their pieces and get stronger positions while defending their own king, and most importantly, attacking the enemy's king. The match between the TRA and the new GCA is a real coin flip. Who ends up winning? Let's find out. The first attacker is the new GCA with pawn to e4. It's a strong opening move, puts the pawn in the center and keeps the structure. Pawn to c5, the Sicilian defense, a very common defense move. They're going to need to do something dramatic if they want to turn the tide of the game. Knight to f3, continuing the offensive. Pawn to d6, defending the pawn. This is not looking good for the TRA. Pawn to d4, threatening the pawn on c5. This is it. Pawn takes d4, knight takes d4. It's time for the development. Knight to f6, knight c3 getting double knights. It's time for the counterattack. Pawn e5. This is risky, this is interesting, this can go either way. But the new GCA is going for the heart. Bishop b5, check, the Venice attack. Vivaldi was born in Venice. This is the direct attack on the heart. Will they take it? Will they surrender? Knight bd7, not accepting the resignation. Evan is not giving in. Pawn on a6, direct counterattack. Bishop takes d7, queen takes. Bishop g5, threatening the knight. Knight takes e4. Bishop takes g7. Knight takes e4, castle. Queen takes d6, direct confrontation. It's queen versus queen. It's getting close, but one threat lay dormant. The clock. The clock is ticking. It causes each side to make bad decisions, blundering pieces, left, right, and center. The black bishop attacking on all diagonals. Who is this bishop? It was Cello Slice all along. When the dust has settled, the ending comes out to be a knight and bishop on the new GCA and two bishops on the TRA. You would think that the bishop diagonal would make the TRA's advantage, but one bishop is trapped, immobilized, the banned bishop. At this point, the new GCA has to start thinking of winning the game. The only way they can is with promotion, but promotion takes time. Do they have this time? Bishop f5, pawn f3, offering to trade a lost piece for a new one. Bishop takes e4, trade accepted. The rooks are on the move, people! It's now or never for promotion, but the new GCA isn't promoting. They need to end it, or else it'll be a draw. Slowly but surely, the tide is shifting more in favor of the TRA. They have to start forcing opportunities or they'll be defeated. Pawn takes f4, blundering their bishop. If the new GCA sees this, it's over. It's a rook game now. At this point in the endgame, there's really only one thing the new GCA can do to win, and that's promoting. Both sides are down material, the new GCA more so, but they have a better pawn structure. It's still anyone's game now. The push. The pawn on the third rank. the TRA Rook pushing to attack the pawns, but the new GCA reinforcing it, the 4th rank. The TRA has to make a decision now, sacrifice the Rook to stop the pawn, or push their own pawn. Rank 5, 6, 7, what will it be? Moments before the promotion, this can go either way. Check. King takes b8, stalemate. A stalemate is defined as a position counting as a draw in which a player is not in check but cannot move except into check. But it can also mean a situation in which further action or progress by opposing or competing parties seems impossible. In this situation, both sides can still move freely, but neither side can win or lose. They're stuck. What separates the unnamed SMP from all other SMPs? Is it that it never got an official name? Or is it the lore? The unnamed SMP isn't just about what happens and when it happens. There were planned events, planned storylines, etc., but none stood out. They all seemed similar to each other. They seemed similar to the original storyline that wasn't planned, but that would all change. Starting on July 22nd, 2021, the fine line between live and lore, improv and planned improv, finally breaks. It wasn't instant though. As far back as the fake reboot of Season 1, Chicken had planned lore and scripted events. During Season 2, Jay's character Sin had an entire lore line for themselves called Sin's Log. But the first ever scripted moment of the entire SMP happened on July 22nd, 2021. Chicken wins the election as usual, but this time, Koldrel and Weebichu are one step ahead of him. After Chicken gets announced as the new president, Weebichu assassinates him in a scripted moment. The newly inaugurated president in the unnamed SMP has been assassinated before on other accounts, but this was planned, this was scripted, and this was when lore began. Soon after the election, players stopped referring to Chicken on the server as Chicken, but instead Zombie Charm. Jay would no longer be playing Jay, but instead a version of themselves with PTSD and the world's worst anxiety, Sin. I only got on the server to build Soxenberg, build lore-related structures, and most importantly record lore. Past events and phenomenons were revisited and explained with lore. The server was no longer about what will happen, but instead, this is going to happen, and we have to record it. We were previously acting for a camera on our own terms, but now we were acting like another version of ourselves in a block game. Soon thereafter, players only got on to record lore. The three main lore lines were Sin's Log, the Chaos Trio, and Ascendancy lore, starring Sin, Zombie Charm, and I respectively. Each lore line could not be more different, although Sin's Log and Chaos Trio were connected. Sin's Log takes on the story of Sin, a young axolotl who is adopted by a man in a chicken onesie and raised throughout their life. The Chaos Trio is a continuation of the election, where a now zombie form of the assassinated Chicken Charm joins the TRA in an act of revenge. Finally, the Ascendancy is a series of events stemming from the president of the TRA, Mayday's betrayal of myself and to continue the legacy of the previous scandalous belief. Eventually, all three lore lines are merged with Sin's Log and the Chaos Trio, combining during the Zombie War, and further joining with the Ascendancy's plotline in what can only be described as the end of time, and most importantly, the end of Season 2. What? The second season of the Unnamed SMP, done just like that? Well, yes. The Unnamed SMP, past the election, was just a series of lore lines and lore events. As far as unplanned storyline, there was none. Or so one might think, because under the surface of what was released to the public, there lay the same Unnamed SMP that was once shown, the same Unnamed SMP that has lasted until today.
Hello, Kojo.
Little chicken.
Why?
Oh my god.
Permission to move Sky to the audience.
Why?